choosing the right provider is still vitally important. A lot of people talk about change management and people management and project management being key, and it is. You can have the best software in the world, but if you implement it badly, it's still going to fail. But on the flip side, you can have really, really bad software, and even if you implement it very, very well, if it's clunky to use and it takes an eternity to train people, and you need an army of super users to be able to educate the casual requisitioner into how to operate it, then that's not going to work either. So take the time, see it as an investment rather than a cost if you need to get some external help. Procurement technology is a lot more affordable than maybe you think, especially if you're a medium-sized business or even a pretty small organization.
Thanks so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement for companies running SAP. Today, we have the great pleasure of James Meads joining us. James is the founder of ProcurementSoftware.site, and that is a tool to help you discover what's out there for procurement technology. James, thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for having me. Pleasure to be with you and your audience. So, looking forward to it.
Amazing. So when I think about a software tool, a website, a catalog, a tool to help you figure out what's out there for ProcureTech, there has to be a story behind how did ProcurementSoftware.site come together?
Yeah, I mean, my background is as a procurement practitioner. I'm not a tech guy or a software developer. And I guess the push factor, or one of the push factors of why I ultimately decided to leave corporate, other than wanting time and location freedom that anyone that starts their own business, I guess, wants, is that in the corporate world, as a category manager in a large corporate organization, I felt quite often like a very well-paid admin assistant with all of the day-to-day crap, for want of a better word, that I was getting dragged into. And I just thought, this is so inefficient. You don't need to be paying me my salary to run around with contracts or to submit travel expense forms or on email and Excel, or to do all of this day-to-day firefighting because so many processes were broken as a result of human error, especially across the procure-to-pay process, invoices going missing or getting lost or not being paid on time. I just thought there must be a better way. And like most procurement pros, I'd heard of the usual suspects that were out there, the SAP Arebas, the Coopers, the legacy suites or the legacy source-to-pay platforms, as I tend to refer to them. But I had little inclination until I started digging just how rich the coal seam was beyond that initial layer. And I think that's a problem that most corporate procurement leaders have, simply because a lot of these more niche procurement tech players don't have the marketing budget to go out and do what SAP or Cooper does with sponsoring conferences or running all of these webinars or paid ads and traffic and all of that. But that's where the innovation is. And that's where you can sort of really kick on and go to the next level. So once I started digging and finding out more and more and more of these procurement tech providers, I started a podcast during COVID, during lockdown, that we still run, actually. It's called the Procurement Software Podcast. And I was just curious. I wanted to speak to procurement tech founders just to get conversations with them and understand more around their platforms and educate myself, while at the same time, trying to build a little bit of personal brand to separate myself from every other freelance procurement consultant or interim manager that's out there. And tech was really the thing that I was the most curious about in the procurement space. And nobody really was doing much content on it. I mean, there were events that covered it, but there were not much accessible content that's not beyond a research or analyst firm's paywall that you could access. So that was really the driving factor behind why I got started. And then once we gained a little bit of traction, I thought, wouldn't it be great to put together some kind of almanac or yearbook or some kind of searchable platform where you can access all of these different procurement tech companies whose founders I'm interviewing on the podcast, to be able to discover what else is out there. And that's really what then made me push the button in, when was it, autumn 2021, to start getting the website developed and putting what became procurement software.site together.
Love it. I love it. Because, outside of the giant famous pay-to-play analysts, there's no, without naming any names, unless you want to pay a substantial sum of money, you're never going to show up on one of those quadrants. And I think for people to learn what's out there and what's real, as opposed to an interesting game, the more I've gotten to learn about how some of the analysts organizations work, the more fascinated I am about the business model of being the analyst. And what I love about what you're doing is you're literally disrupting that entire business with giving the answer away broadly for free in terms of helping people discover what's out there and get into that supplier discovery. So for people that need to, they're like those procurement folks that are amazing at running sourcing events, but they don't always know who to invite. This, as a supplier discovery tool, this is super important for folks out there because these are significant investments that people are making.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. And yes, there are some analyst firms that are more ethical than others in their business model. And there are some good eggs out there, but there are plenty that do monetize both the buy side and the sell side. And I kind of think, well, you're kind of compromised in your analysis if you're taking money from both sides of the fence. So I don't look down on anyone that makes a living out of either one or the other, because you have to make money somehow. But to charge users to access the platform and then to charge software companies to get a write-up I just question the ethics of that. So I think
it's hard not to have a conflict of interest there. That's one,
of course,
like
it
we
is.
mentioned, somebody like
Absolutely.
yourself or a Spend Matters, where it's not a pay to play, it's a participate to play. And it's a fundamentally different model. But that contrast is so important to understand when you're relying on some of those analyses to make some multi-million-dollar investments.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend that we do the same level of research as the big research houses. We don't, because that's why the platform's free to use. If I was employing a team of analysts, then of course we would have to charge a significant amount to access that research. And that's fine that is Spend Matters model, and they do a very good job. But they monetize predominantly the buy side. I mean, yes, they do sponsored content, but they don't operate a pay-to-play model in terms of charging the software companies to have a write-up. So, yeah, it's a great business model, but it's only accessible and affordable, really, to the largest enterprises, and that's fine for Spend Matters in terms of how they generate their revenue. They've built a very successful business model from it. But if you're a mid-sized business and you're the CFO or the CPO, and you want to learn more about procurement tech, you're not going to be able to afford their fees. And to be quite frank, you probably don't need the level of detail that their research and that their analysts go into, because the tech that you're going to be sourcing is going to be a lot less complex than what a Fortune 500 company would typically go out and buy. So really the problem that we set out to solve was the average procurement leader and his or her team knows how to run a sourcing event to pick the right technology partner, but they often don't know the breadth of the market of who's out there. And that's really where we aim to be able to get the user to, without them having to pay a fee to do that. Now, yes, we do have services that we charge for if they want more of a white glove service, or if you're a boutique consultancy or a freelance consultant that needs constant access to the market and understand updates in real time as we make them, what we're changing in the website. But that's a fraction of the people that would typically want to access that data. And if that's how we make our money, but then the majority of users can go in and get what they want just on an ad hoc basis free of charge, then that's really what we aim to do, to democratize access to that first level access to that data, just to be able to understand who is out there on the market and broadly speaking, what are the specialisms and the modules and functionality that their software has.
It's so important. So important to help people understand that the contrast. Because I think there's often, if you listen to the marketing and if you listen to the, kind of the first level sales pitch, it's for some of the big suites, it's, well, we do everything. And then, you sometimes dig a little bit and it's like, well, actually, but not that, or, but not that, or we sort of do that, but, there's other ways to do that, or we've got 5 ways to do that and none of them work super
Yeah.
well, but we have some
Yeah.
ways to address
Or
that.
we do that,
And,
but
and
it's a
there's
company that
often
we bought and it doesn't really integrate with the core software that well.
things like that, right? So that idea of helping companies identify the areas that are strengths, right? I have huge respect for the way some of the top sourcing tools can run sourcing events and get those out to massive sets of organizations to help them see those and discover those and respond to them. And that's a huge investment that's gone in over decades to be able to build that kind of capability. But then, there's some really remarkable tools out there for, I look at somebody like a Icertis that has such a strength in contract management. Not everybody needs that big or strong of a tool, but it's inspiring to look at the capability that they've got in there. And when we think about some of the biggest suites, you can see where, there could be maybe a little tension sometimes between like an Icertis and an SAP Ariba, where Ariba has a contracting tool and Icertis happens to have a best-in-class contracting tool, and there's a type of partnership there. And it's always interesting for me to see what these much larger organizations have done. Of course, for us as an add-on for SAP, the number one add-on for procure to pay or intake to pay for SAP. But it's similarly that complementary story of how do some of these things go together and how do organizations kind of see through we're the unicorn that everybody would love of the one big solution that does everything, and then help work with somebody like yourself to discover that contrast between the large suites and the startups or the more niche players that have add-ons that can help fill in those gaps or become that key to unlock the value that's trapped in one of those stages in intake to pay.
I think we're going to see a bit of a divergence here in terms of how the market goes. So I think you're going to have your established businesses that are maybe already running one of these legacy suites, or at least they're going to have something like an SAP or an Oracle as an enterprise-wide ERP system that they're running. And they really need to then take a more Lego-based approach and build blocks on top of that to get best-in-class solutions to do what they need them to do. And we're talking there mainly sort of established corporate organizations in what I would call, in speech marks, the old economy. Where I think we're going to see a divergence now is with a lot of these rapidly growing tech companies or any sort of mid-market business that is approaching digital transformation in procurement from a completely greenfield perspective. Maybe they've hired a head of procurement in from a large corporate who's taken a step down to mid-market to get a CPO role in one of these types of businesses. And that individual is, I really envy their roles because they really have a blank slate to go from. They don't have an IT person telling them that they have to source software from a specific stable because they're building from scratch. So they don't have any conflicts with existing technology other than, maybe they've got an ERP that's basically just running finance and a little bit of operations planning. But that's where I see you being able to really take a modular approach and build best of breed technology pretty much from scratch. And now with open APIs, okay, you're probably not going to be able to integrate 20 solutions, but you can realistically probably integrate 3 or 4 if you've got best in class for source to pay, you've got best in class for contract management, you've got something that does spend analytics, and then maybe you've got something on the supplier risk or ESG if you're a manufacturing company, or something else to build on top of that. That would be a pretty robust tech stack for a mid-sized business, which I would also say is going to be a lot more affordable than probably going out and buying one of these more established procurement suites with the price tags that they have. So I see both models enduring and prospering, but I do see a divergence away from those that have a well-established existing tech stack and those that are starting digital transformation and procurement from a completely greenfield standpoint.
I love it. I think there's a lot of wisdom there, especially for those that are more established and those that are fast growing, because those that want to go fast can go alone, and those that want to go far go together. And that usually means that they need some partners to go help them on that journey. James, after our chat here, if there's one thing that you would really want procurement or IT leaders to remember 6 weeks later, what would that be?
It would be that choosing the right provider is still vitally important. A lot of people talk about change management and people management and project management being key, and it is. You can have the best software in the world, but if you implement it badly, it's still going to fail. But on the flip side, you can have really, really bad software, and even if you implement it very, very well, if it's clunky to use and it takes an eternity to train people, and you need an army of super users to be able to educate the casual requisitioner into how to operate it, then that's not going to work either. So take the time, see it as an investment rather than a cost if you need to get some external help. Procurement technology is a lot more affordable than maybe you think, especially if you're a medium-sized business or even a pretty small organization. There's pretty basic purchasing software that can do workflow automation and act as a repository to take your procurement operations outside of email and Excel at a very affordable cost. And the return on investment that you'll see as a result of having good data and freeing up your team from doing administrative busy work will more than pay for it. It's Amazon is not really an e-commerce company. Tinder is not really a dating app. At the end of the day, they're data companies, and that's how they make their money. So if you've got bad data in procurement, then if your competitors have data that's slightly better than yours, they're probably going to win.
So important. Usability and insights need to come together. It's got to be easy to use or nobody's going to use it. I love it. James, thank you so much for joining. And this has been another edition of the Never Ending Climb for a stronger supply chain and procurement for companies running SAP. And I would encourage all of you to check out procurementsoftware.site. Great stuff there. And stay tuned. Coming soon to the site is another listing for the #1 add-on for intake to pay for companies running SAP. Thanks so much, everybody.